On December 19th, 1944, the East China Sea churned with violence. Japan's newest aircraft carrier, Unryu, struggled against the sea, her hull punctured by an American torpedo. On her first combat mission, transporting a secret weapon to Luzon, she now fought for survival. Despite the hit, Unryu remained steady, thanks to Captain Kaname Konishi's command, keeping the ship's list to just 3 degrees. Nearby, USS Redfish lurked beneath the waves. Commander McGregor appeared through his periscope, knowing he needed a second salvo to finish the carrier. But then, destroyer Hinoki passed astern, perfectly lined up with Redfish's rear tubes. Unable to resist, McGregor fired. But Hinoki neatly evaded, leaving him with empty tubes and a still-floating carrier in range. The skipper cursed his hasty decision, knowing it could have cost him his prize, but quickly refocused on the ship. As his crew frantically reloaded a single torpedo, McGregor knew this was his last chance. At 1,100 yards, he gave the order to fire. It would take 45 agonizing seconds to see if they had sealed the fate of Unryu, one of the Empire's last working aircraft carriers. By early summer 1942, the losses of 1 light and 4 fleet carriers at the battles of the Coral Sea and Midway sent shockwaves through Japan's naval planning circles. There was no denying it now. The Imperial Japanese Navy was losing its grip on the Pacific, and the tide of war was turning against them. In response, admirals hastily drafted an ambitious ship construction program, setting challenging goals that far outstripped their production ability. The carrier program was carried out with particular urgency, and between August and December, workers laid the keels for the first 3 Unryu-class aircraft carriers, Unryu, Amagi, and Katsuragi. This new type of ship, a scaled-down evolution of the earlier Hiryu class, displaced around 20,000 tons and stretched 745 feet. Made to be efficient in combat, the Unryu-class carriers could each carry up to 57 aircraft and featured a battery of dual-purpose and anti-aircraft guns. However, lacking the armored decks of their American counterparts, these carriers were vulnerable to attack. The plan called for a total of 14 carriers to be built by 1948, with up to 9 under simultaneous construction at its peak. This grand strategy hinged on critical assumptions about raw materials, industrial capacity, trained personnel, and aircraft production. But as Japan's resources dwindled, the prospect of the mighty class began to weaken. By the time the first of her class, Unryu, began her first deployment late in the year, Japan's naval forces were in tatters, and the ambitious plan for 14 Unryu-class carriers was faltering as the destroyer fleet, crucial for protection, had been decimated. With 50 destroyers lost, Japan's newest carriers were left dangerously exposed. The first of her class, Unryu, heavenward-bound dragon, was commissioned into service in August 1942 under the command of Captain Kaname Konishi, a veteran of the Imperial Navy. Originally, Unryu and her sister carrier, Amagi, were assigned to Vice Admiral Ozawa's mobile fleet for the Battle of Leyte Gulf. However, severe shortages of aircraft and trained personnel prevented both carriers from participating in what became Japan's last major naval battle. Following Leyte's devastating defeat in late October, the remnants of the mobile fleet returned to Japan, and Unryu briefly flew Vice Admiral Ozawa's flag as the force regrouped. By mid-November, however, mounting losses disbanded the fleet, and carriers Unryu, Amagi, and the newly arrived Katsuragi were once again left without a clear purpose. Crippling shortages of fuel, trained pilots, and aircraft, compounded by the Empire's preference to launch more and more kamikaze operations in the Philippines, severely limited the carrier's potential. With nothing left to do, the powerful trio of sisters were relegated to routine patrols between Kure, Hashirajima, and Gunchan, never venturing beyond the inland sea. For Captain Konishi and Unryu's crew, it was a frustrating existence. Late November gave them their first and so far only taste of battle when they managed to embark a few A6M fighters and B-6N torpedo bombers for brief patrols, yet far from where the motherland needed them the most. That month, further losses in the war, like carrier Shinyo and the battleship Shinano by American submarines, meant the threat was too significant to risk even short coastal trips for training or convoy protection. As a result, Unryu and her sisters appeared fated to idle through the rest of the war in the inland sea. On December 13, 1944, news of General Douglas MacArthur's invasion fleet near the Sulu Sea caused alarm in Tokyo. The long-anticipated invasion of Luzon seemed imminent. The combined fleet responded with urgent orders. Japan's newest experimental weapon was to be rushed to Manila by aircraft carriers Unryu and Ryū. The weapon was the Oka, a rocket-powered kamikaze aircraft designed for maximum devastation in a single strike. These cherry blossoms, piloted by men on one-way missions, were Japan's desperate gambit against overwhelming odds. 30 Okas were rapidly packaged and loaded into Unryu's lower hangar deck. For well over 24 hours straight, the crew worked at a feverish pace, energized by the prospect of action after months of idleness. They knew this was the combined fleet's second attempt to deliver Okas by carrier. The first, aboard the massive Shinano, had ended when an American submarine sent her to the bottom before reaching her destination. Unryu's escort for the important mission comprised 2 new Matsu-class destroyers, Hinoki and Momi, optimized for anti-submarine warfare and air defense. On December 15th, they were joined by the battle-hardened destroyer Shigure. Her name was legendary throughout the Imperial Navy, having earned a reputation for survival, though often as the sole ship to return from devastating battles. That night, intelligence revealed the enemy invasion was targeting Mindoro, not Luzon, offering a brief respite. The crew used this time to load additional supplies and personnel bound for Manila. Departure was delayed by a day, with Ryū given an extra week to load more Okas and conduct her mission separately. On the morning of December 17th, the sleek Unryu, her hull and flight deck adorned with new zigzag camouflage patterns, slipped away from Kure Base. Loaded with planes, torpedo warheads, suicide boats, soldiers, passengers, and most critically, 30 Oka flying rocket bombs, she carried the hopes of Luzon's defense. Aboard destroyer Hinoki, Lieutenant Commander Sugama oversaw anti-submarine defense, but the weight of the squadron's fate rested squarely on Unryu's Captain Kaname Konishi. Their orders were to proceed to Manila, offload the precious cargo, and await further instructions on the Mindoro counterattacks. The following day, Unryu and her escorts pushed southward through increasingly turbulent seas. Twice, the crackle of enemy radar forced tense course adjustments in fear the enemy had spotted them. Unbeknownst to them, the U.S. Navy's attention was fixed on a savage typhoon that was exacting a devastating toll on Halsey's Task Force 38. Dawn on December 19th broke with howling winds, churning waves, and overall bad weather. Captain Kaname, his senses sharpened by years at sea, ordered heightened alert, and the task force narrowly avoided a mine. By noon, the seas began to calm as Unryu approached the Saishud Islands. While a few patrols were launched, the lingering poor visibility and swells made threat detection a near impossible task. Drawing on his destroyer experience, Kaname reminded his men to emphasize sound detection above all, knowing their ears might provide the only warning of impending danger. At 3 p.m., the formation tightened like a coiled spring. Shigure at point, Momi off the port quarter, and Hinoki guarding starboard. On the bridge, Captain Kaname and his officers peered into the gloomy horizon. Just an hour later, as Unryu turned south, she unknowingly set course right into an American submarine, USS Redfish, a Belau-class sub under the lead of Commander L.D. McGregor. On the afternoon of December 17th, Redfish was prowling off the China coast when an ultra message from Pearl Harbor warned of an important enemy task force moving south. Within moments, the sub was spotted by a Japanese patrol plane, dropping a depth charge that missed. Knowing the convoy might be near, McGregor scanned the horizon, and saw what looked like a patrol boat's mast, then a second. Just before 4:30 p.m., his heart raced as a large flat top materialized. Gripping the periscope, he yelled, quote, "Battle station's torpedo. This is a big baby." Redfish surged forward at maximum submerged speed, right when the Japanese carrier zigzagged straight toward them. While 3 escorts flanked the carrier, McGregor's focus was locked on the prize, especially when the target approached at a 30-degree starboard angle, a near-perfect setup. Moments later, the submarine unleashed a spread of 6 torpedoes from 1,470 yards. After the sound watch aboard Unryu detected the submarine, sound contact confirmed an approaching threat from the starboard side, quickly followed by the alarming realization of torpedo wakes and the unmistakable noise of an imminent strike. Nonetheless, the crew sprang into action, guns blazing at the approaching wakes. Desperate to comb them, Kaname ordered Unryu into a hard starboard turn at full speed, the new carrier responding swiftly. Now, all the skipper and his men could do was hold their breath as the torpedoes closed in. 3 passed ahead, but the 4th found its mark, slammed into her forward section just beneath the island. On the bridge, Captain Kaname and his staff felt the violent explosion as Unryu shuddered, rapidly losing speed. Below decks, chaos erupted in a matter of seconds. The torpedo had torn into the control center, flooding vital compartments and igniting fires that quickly spread to the hangar deck's volatile cargo. But the most devastating blow came as the main steam pipe shattered, flooding boiler rooms, plummeting the steam pressure, and forcing Unryu to lurch to a halt. Just then, the power failed, plunging the mighty carrier into darkness as she began to list starboard. Aboard Unryu, the crew fought frantically to save their ship. They battled fires, restored partial power, and struggled to right the list. After tossing trucks and equipment overboard, the list was evened. They managed to get the carrier barely moving again, but this triumph would be short-lived. Just as Unryu limped forward, Lookout shouted a bone-chilling warning. Another torpedo was incoming. While gunners unleashed a frantic barrage, it was futile, and the weapon struck with devastating precision. Slamming into her starboard side, just forward of the bridge, the torpedo found its mark in the ship's most vulnerable point, where ammunition, aviation fuel, and material stores were concentrated. Within seconds, a series of violent explosions ripped through Unryu, each more powerful than the last. Most importantly, the Oka bombs in the lower hangar deck joined the inferno. On the bridge, Captain Kaname and his officers were thrown to the deck as a massive fireball erupted before them. The ship lurched sickeningly, her deck tilting at a terrifying angle as Unryu heeled sharply to starboard. These explosions tore Unryu's hull wide open, and seawater flooded the boiler rooms with alarming speed. Within minutes, the list exceeded 30 degrees, sending aircraft sliding off the deck into the churning sea. Knowing the ship was doomed, Captain Kaname gave the order to abandon the ship. Yet he remained at his post, watching with a mixture of pride and sorrow as his crew assembled on the rapidly tilting flight deck. As they did so, the ever-so-disciplined men shouted, quote, "Banzai, long live the Emperor," 3 times before fighting for survival. Some gunners, defiant to the last moment, continued firing at the unseen enemy. Right before 5 p.m., Unryu made her final plunge, slipping beneath the waves bow first, taking Captain Kaname, his officers, and 1,238 souls with her. Only 12 minutes had passed since the explosion. Shigure and Momi raced to pluck survivors from one of the war's greatest naval disasters from the sea. Hinoki furiously set out into the perilous waters once more, determined to avenge the sinking. Hinoki furiously pursued Redfish in the name of Unryu and all who perished with her, launching her depth charges perilously close to the submarine, wreaking havoc on her systems. Going as deep as the vessel could, the Americans endured 2 hours of relentless depth charging before escaping. Hinoki and Momi pressed on to Manila, arriving on January 4th, 1945, just as MacArthur's invasion force approached. Ordered to flee to Formosa, American forces discovered them on January 5th, and a desperate chase ensued, where an aerial torpedo destroyed Momi, lost with all hands. Hinoki, damaged but defiant, made a final dash for safety, but was intercepted by American destroyers and sank after a fierce gun battle in what would be the last surface engagement between the US and Japanese navies. With Hinoki's sinking, a grim cycle was complete. Once again, Shigure alone survived from the squadron that had left Kure on December 17th. However, she would meet her end just weeks later while escorting a convoy. Unryū's loss, coming just 6 months after her commissioning, underscored Japan's rapidly diminishing naval strength. According to Japanese records, quote, her tragic fate was lamented by everyone. Her end mirrored that of Shinano, both carriers taking their Oka payload to the ocean floor instead of Luzon. And while the cherry blossoms finally arrived in the Philippines in March 1945, not even the human-guided bombs could change the inevitable. By then, the Imperial Japanese Navy and the nation could see the writing on the wall.